What's up, everybody? D-Man back. Welcome to a brand new video, and today we're going to be doing Godzillathon episode 33. This is for Godzilla 2014. So, this was my very first Godzilla movie in the movie theaters. Obviously, it was the first US Godzilla movie since the 98 movie, and it was really a chance for America to redeem themselves when making Godzilla movies. By this point, Godzilla had been dead for 10 years. They hadn't made a new movie for 10 years. I'm not going to, I'm not going to cover Godzilla's cameo in Always Sunset on 3rd Street or whatever it's called, because that's just not important. But Godzilla has been gone for multiple years now, and he's making his return to the big screen from America, and it's the first time I ever get to see a Godzilla movie in theaters. Now, when this movie came out, it was May 16th, and I remember that day so well because at my school we had like this Greek fair kind of thing. It was basically a fair that the 7th graders would put on, and they'd get to run it, and then after the fair, you would go, you just go home. That was basically, if you were a 7th grader, that was your day, was you went to like the gym, you'd set up, and then after you set up, you'd just wait for a while, and then all the other kids, the 8th graders and the 6th graders would come in, and then they'd do whatever your fair activity was. So people had like Minotaur mazes and everything like that, and I made this elaborate Hydra. It wasn't actually a Hydra. I think the character that I chose to represent at the fair was like this dragon called Layden or something like that. But I picked it for a very specific reason, because Hercules was the one who killed Layden, and Hercules was the one who I had just read fight Godzilla. Like, around this time was when I got Marvel's Godzilla issue, whatever I got, like 3rd issue or something, and in it, Hercules fights Godzilla, and he loses, so I was like, oh yeah, I'm gonna have someone who fights Godzilla in my fair activity, because why not? It's the day Godzilla comes out, and we did the fair. It was great, and then after school I got out, but my dad was caught up at work. He had to work late, and I was destroyed. I thought I was not going to be able to get to 2014 in time. It was that Friday night, and I didn't think I was going to get to go watch the movie, and I was so mad. Like, how could that happen of all days? But luckily, he was able to get off work, and he came by and picked me up from the school, and we went to the theater that night, and it was pretty late by the time we got there. We saw a pretty late showing of the movie, but we got to see the last showing of the day for Godzilla 2014, and it was awesome. I loved it so much. At the time, it was my favorite Godzilla movie ever. Obviously, that's changed after the hype died down a little bit. I just loved the movie, and I still love it. And I went back and saw it multiple more times. I do hold the record for the most times I've ever viewed a movie in theaters, with Kong Skull Island, with around 6 or 7 times in the theaters to watch that movie, and then right after that would be Shin Godzilla, with around 4 or 5 times I saw it. This movie I saw 2 or 3 times in theaters, but back then that was a lot for me. That was still a lot. So, starting out the movie, actually initially when the movie starts out and you get this this Project Monarch opening, which obviously is not what it's called. That's the name for the Kong Skull Island intro. This one's called, like, I don't know, the Pacific or something, Map of the Pacific. But when the opening starts out, I rather didn't like it. I thought I was not going to like the movie at all, because although the trailers had me really hyped up and I was super excited, and it was Godzilla back on the big screen, this intro is very reminiscent of Godzilla 1998, and back then I was in that phase where I had realized only a few years prior how bad that movie is as a Godzilla movie, so I was in that kind of time frame when I just couldn't appreciate anything about it. And when this movie started out, immediately I was like, oh, really? The music's reminiscent of the 98 movie. The whole intro, the beginning scene here is reminiscent of the 98 movie. I was like, how could this happen? Like, how could America do it again? They're ruining it again. I was totally wrong. They definitely didn't. Despite what some people in the comments on this video may say, guarantee at least one person, Bloodborne, is going to say that they don't like this movie. But it's a good movie. I do like it. It's just this intro, when I very first saw it, really made me go, wait a minute, this movie is going to suck after all. And 5 minutes into the movie, I was already changing my mind. So the intro starts out, Project Monarch. It's very cool. We start with footage in 1954 of Godzilla's first, I guess, quote-unquote first, because this has been retconned in Kong Skull Island's continuity. But for this movie alone, the first appearance of Godzilla in 1954, Godzilla swimming around through the ocean, which, fantastic. It looks so good seeing all these natives looking on their island, looking out, and Godzilla swimming over in the ocean. You just see these massive dorsal fins going through the ocean. He just has a real sense of scale. Dorsal fins are actually too small in this design, in my opinion. They need to be a bit longer, but you don't really get a sense of how unproportional they are during this sequence. So this scene's just awesome. Godzilla lands on the island Bikini Atoll, and he's hit by the Castle Bravo atomic bomb in 1954. This is the last time Godzilla's seen. Pretty awesome. So great way to start the movie. We cut to 1999, and a mine collapses in the Philippines. Dr. Serizawa, pretty much this was the point when I was like, wait, never mind, this movie's going to be awesome. We are introduced to Ken Watanabe's character, Dr. Serizawa, and the second I heard his name, I had heard rumors leading up to the movie that that's who he was going to be playing, but I was like, whatever, that's not true. The second they said his name, I was just like, oh yes, like finally we're getting some Easter eggs, some great Godzilla references. So Dr. Serizawa and his assistant Dr. Graham investigate this whole collapsed mine situation, which in the novelization, I'm not here to talk about the novelization. That'll probably be its own review some other day, not part of Godzillathon. But in the novelization, this sequence is done a lot better. It's a lot more eerie. You get some investigations where Serizawa is interviewing these radiation victims from the mine. They're down there in the mine, and Graham snaps a picture or something like that, and it just reveals these dead bodies crashed in the cave. So it's a lot darker of a subject matter in the novelization. The novelization is kind of what a lot of us thought this movie was gonna be, which was a return to the 54 form. It was gonna be this very dark, scary movie, and it was gonna be very emotional. Godzilla 2014 doesn't actually wind up being as much of that very emotional, in terms of scary and just depressing mood that a lot of us thought it was and wanted it to be. It winds up being more emotional, as in a family drama. So it was kind of a little bit of false advertising. The advertising campaign for this movie probably is what, in retrospect, makes me have the dislike for this movie that I have, which, as you'll see, is not a lot. But the advertising campaign for this movie was absolutely fantastic. And I know I'm kind of all over the place with this review, but that's because I have such a deep connection with Godzilla 2014. Unlike a lot of these other, like, previous Millennium movies that I've been talking about, it's like I have a couple memories associated with them, but nothing on the scale of this movie. So the advertising campaign for this movie, ever since the first teaser trailer came out, I became obsessed with Godzilla 2014 back in 2014 and 2013 era. So I was just absolutely obsessed with it. I could not stop watching the trailer over and over and over again. I wrote the dialogue down on paper, that whole, like, gentlemen, you were being sent in by Halo drop speech that's given in that teaser trailer. I found leaked Comic-Con footage online that I watched probably a million times. I was making YouTube playlists of it. I was basically just devoting my entire life to the advertising campaign for this movie. And the advertising campaign for this movie does two things simultaneously. Number one, it sets up the very dark 54 style tone with just Godzilla. That is key, because going into this movie, I was really hoping for, and it was kind of like a mixed thing, because it was, I was not totally at the point where I am now, where I appreciate the solo Godzilla movies more than I appreciate the ones when he's with other monsters, but back then I was really hoping for a 54 remake. But at the same time, I was like, this might be boring if it's a 54 remake. I already know how it ends. Plus, I don't want Godzilla to die. I want him to return for sequels. Plus, it would be cool to see him fighting other monsters. And, we knew that there was going to be Mutos in it. We saw that weird crab monster that was seen in the Now I Am Become Death Destroyer of Worlds teaser. That big red crab monster that doesn't actually appear in the movie. So we knew there was going to be other monsters in the movie, but we didn't know about the Mutos. We didn't know what they were. I knew there were monsters called Mutos in the movie because I watched DTN, but I had no idea that they were going to be, like, main villains. I thought that there was going to be, like, these monsters showed up up, and then we killed them, the military killed them, and now Godzilla's here. I thought that's how it was going to be. I just didn't expect that Godzilla was going to be fighting them. So I was just really excited for this kind of nationwide destruction that looked like it was going to be promised in the trailer. There was that very, I'd say, kind of misleading shot of the Statue of Liberty being all destroyed, and you're led to believe that Godzilla destroys the Statue of Liberty in the teaser trailer, but it was the small Statue of Liberty in Las Vegas that the Muto destroys, and you don't actually even see it in the movie. I don't know. I was very excited for a solo horror Godzilla movie, and another thing that the trailers did, the other simultaneous thing that it did, was hide Godzilla. You never saw Godzilla in all the teaser trailers. Like, that you'd see glimpses of him, little tiny glimpses of him, but that was it. That was all you got to see, and it really got me super excited, because what does Godzilla look like? I have to see him. Then we got that car commercial. I think that came out before the movie, where Godzilla's eating the Kias or whatever they are, and I lost my mind. I was like, oh my god, he looks amazing. I cannot wait for this movie. The movie comes out, and at first I was in love. I was like, whatever, I don't care that it's not a solo Godzilla movie. The Mutos are awesome. As time went on, I started to think, well, maybe the movie would have been better if it was just Godzilla. Maybe we would have gotten to know the characters on a personal level a little more. Maybe we would have cared for Ford Brody a little more instead of just caring for his father. Maybe we would have, just gotten the 54 movie that everyone wanted. Shin Godzilla helps clear a lot of that up, but it doesn't do what this movie looked like it was gonna do. This movie, I'd say the premise that I went into the movie with was a solo horror Godzilla movie directed by Gareth Edwards, is better than Shin Godzilla could ever be. That's just personally how I feel. But that's just not the movie we got. Anyways, I forgot how I got off on this tangent. I just wanted to say that this movie, when it first came out, I was so in love with it that I thought it was like the greatest Godzilla movie ever. As time went on, I started to cool down and realize, maybe it could have been better, but it's still a good movie. And after a while, after Shin Godzilla came out, I'd say, I went back to this movie and was like, no, there's no point. This is a good movie. There's no point in having just a solo Godzilla movie. This movie is fine on its own. It's great. But it's because of that really deep connection I have with this movie, remembering the advertising campaign and how obsessed with it I was, and how basically my phone was filled to the brim with 500 screenshots from every trailer that came out, and just how exciting of a time it was in my life. I've never seen a Godzilla movie in theaters before by this point, and so this was going to be my first chance to get to see Godzilla on screen. It was just really special, and so for that reason, this movie will, under no circumstances, ever fall out of my top 10 list of Godzilla movies. It will always be there in my top 10 list. Now, getting back into it, the skeleton of a massive unidentified terrestrial organism was found in a cave underground. This is our first hint to the Hollow Earth theory that will be played up upon a lot in Kong Skull Island. However, back at this point in 2014, we didn't know about the bigger universe of the Monsterverse. 2 dormant spores are discovered in the tunnel. I should actually have said 1 dormant spore is discovered in the tunnel. The other one's ripped open, and it appears that something came right out of it. There's a great build-up as it's revealed that something massive bust out of the side of this mountain and went straight into the ocean and headed straight for Jinjuro, Japan. I would have really liked to see the Muto's first stage, because what does it look like? We never get a chance to know what the spore stage looks like, and I've always been interested to know what it looks like. Is it just a smaller normal Muto? Who knows? I mean, it looks like the ones in the female Muto's egg are kind of normal looking, but why does it need to go back into stasis for so many years? It hatched, it's in this larval stage, and then it goes and hides out back in stasis for a few years, for 15 years. Meanwhile, the female Muto never needed to hatch at all until 2014, when she was ready to just burst out of her cocoon 300 feet tall. And, I do have some questions about how a 300-foot tall monster hung out inside of that nuclear cave, basically, in the mountainside in Nevada for so many years. That's unimportant. The important thing is that the Muto hatched, and I've always wanted to know what it looks like. But regardless, they head straight for Jinjuro, Japan. We are introduced to Joe Brody and his wife. They head straight for this nuclear plant where they work at. Joe's all paranoid because there's these graphs showing this earthquake, that the epicenter is somehow moving towards Japan. He's like, this isn't possible. It's aftershocks from the Philippines earthquake, sure, but how on earth is it getting closer to us? An earthquake hits the plant while Sandra is in the sublevels checking something that Joe told her to go check. And so she has to get out of there very quickly. There's a breach in the reactor as she's on her way out, and the plant starts to come down around everyone. Sandra's killed one of the most emotional scenes of the entire movie, where Joe has to be the one to seal the containment doors, locking his wife in the nuclear radiation for all times. It's a very devastating scene, as you just have to see him sit there and he's waiting for her to run out, and he's just waiting and waiting and waiting, and she never comes. And the second he closes the door, that's when they get there. It was too late regardless. If he had kept the door open, the radiation would have been leaked out and exposed to the whole city, but there was nothing he could do about it. He had to close the door. It's just a shame that pretty much the minute after he closed it, they arrived. The full plant collapses. Joe escapes, but we don't actually see it on screen. Joe's son, Ford, witnesses the entire event from his school. That's also a great scene. I love the visuals of just having Ford looking out the window as you see the entire plant fall in on itself. We are told in the novelization that Joe just barely makes it out of there in a car with his friend, I think Takashi or something like that. Cut to 15 years later in San Francisco in 2014, when Ford Brody is arriving home from his tour in the Middle East. I don't know where he is from in the Middle East, like where he was stationed, but he's coming home from his time in the Middle East. He is an EOD technician, explosive ordnance disposal, for those of you who don't know what that means. His son Sam hardly knows him, and their estranged relationship isn't played up a lot in the movie. However, like I keep going back to the novelization, and again, I really am not wanting to focus on the novelization. In the novelization, they do make a big deal out of the fact that his son barely knows who he is. Like, he doesn't even give him a hug when they first meet. But regardless, in the movie, that's just not seemingly the way it's played up. Sam, Ford's son, really seems to like Ford. Ford's wife, Elle, has had to take care of Sam all on her own for the past few years as Ford's been away, or at least the past, year or whatever. I don't know how long he was gone. Elle gets a call saying that Joe has been arrested in Japan for trespassing in the quarantine zone, so Ford has to head straight to Japan from San Francisco. Joe's apartment is covered head to toe in documents about the meltdown in Junjura, the 54 tests of the atomic bomb, something covered up in that whole situation, as well as documents linking all of that directly to Serizawa, which, how could they have not played up on this? This is one of the most interesting things they could have done in the movie, was have Joe confront Serizawa about, how could you do this? You killed my wife. Like, that kind of thing. How could they have not done this? This just seems like one of the biggest missed opportunities of the entire movie. Serizawa has clearly been found out by Joe. Joe knows everything. He knows that there was something going on in 1954 that was covered up by this organization. He has somehow linked the organization to the meltdown in Junjura in 1999. He knows this guy Serizawa is connected to it. He knows that there's a monster, or he doesn't know it's a monster, but he knows there's some sort of animal being hidden inside the quarantine zone. He knows this from his bioacoustic studies, and we find out now he's studying echolocation. How could we have not had him confront Serizawa about all this? I don't understand the decision to kill Joe Brody, and I know that's a lot of people's big complaint, but honestly, it's a very warranted complaint. How do they not play up on one of the most interesting things in the entire movie? And that would have been the aspect of Joe knowing and probably hating Serizawa and being forced to work with him in order to take down the thing that killed his wife. Like, that would be such a cool subplot for the movie. But instead, Joe dies partway through, and then we're just left with Ford Brody, who we don't really get to know a lot about because he doesn't do a lot of expressing his emotions in this movie. He's just kind of like, all right, gotta get from point A to point B, and that's that. So, I don't know. It's crazy. There's a great scene when Joe breaks and starts crying as he agrees to come to America with Ford. The fantastic thing about this movie is the directing. The camera never settles down. I think every single shot in this movie is done from a handheld camera, so that the camera's always moving and giving you a very nice sense of just a movement. It's giving you a sense that everything's going very quickly, and we don't get too much of that in Godzilla movies. We do have some of that in Shin Godzilla, but that's more of like the camera's always cutting instead of always like shifting and moving like handheld style. And this is kind of what I expected from the American Death Note from 2017, the Netflix version from director Adam Weingard. However, that's definitely not what we got for that movie. The only reason I mention that is because If you go back and watch my review of that movie, I was just talking about how a lot of people leading up to that were just talking about how active the camera was in that movie. However, Gareth Edwards really puts everyone to shame because he always says his camera's moving. The next morning, Joe is headed out to the quarantine zone and he convinces Ford to come with him. Joe reveals that the Q zone is containing some sort of animal, but he doesn't quite know what's going on yet. I love the repetition here of whatever it takes, a quote from Joe hinting to his devotion of his family, and that's exactly why he's going back to the quarantine zone, is to find out what killed his wife after all. He's not going back there to be like, yeah, I'll check it out just because I want to. He's going back there because he feels responsible for what happens to his wife, and he wants to prove it to his son that he's not insane and that he was warranted in his worries. And also, there's a pretty cool scene later on in the movie when Ford repeats this line, whatever it takes, in reference to getting back home to his family. Joe finds the air in the quarantine zone to be non-radioactive, which makes him take off his gas mask and walk around normally. There's a pretty cool Mothra Easter egg when you see Ford's childhood terrarium, and the name on it is Moth, and it's been etched out, and there's an M-A written afterward, so it's named Mothra. And it would be kind of cool if that was just the name of his pet moth, was Mothra, and in the sequel they were like, hey look, there's this giant moth goddess that's flying around, probably not destroying things, but they're like, wow, look at that, what do we name it? And then Ford Brody steps in for a cameo and's like, hey, let's call it Mothra. That'd be kind of cool. That'd be pretty neat. Although I don't like that. I want the mythology of Mothra to already be intact by the time the next movie starts. Regardless, there's a Mothra Easter egg in this movie, and I actually convinced, I think it was my dad, to take me back and see this movie just so I could find it, because I didn't see it, and then when my friends told me about it at school, so I had him take me back to the theater just so I could watch for that one scene. It was pretty worth it. Joe makes it back to his original house right as helicopters pass over and he runs outside to check what's going on. He gets all his data before he leaves, though. The helicopters are headed to the original nuclear plant, which gets the Brodies' attention as they're trying to figure out what's going on. Right afterward, they're caught and pretty much put in jail. They're transported to the Jinjura plant, where a massive cocoon is feeding on an old reactor. Serizawa comes down and checks on Joe, who gives what I would consider one of the most badass monologues in all of Godzilla history. Serizawa's pretty impressed by Joe's knowledge, and then suddenly the cocoon starts emitting this electromagnetic pulse. A grid comes over the cocoon to contain it, and Serizawa tries to kill it with electricity before the creature inside the cocoon can escape. The cocoon is shattered and a huge creature bursts out of it. Joe escapes only to be fatally injured by the creature as the creature pulls down on the containment grid, knocking over a giant crane that lands pretty much right on Joe. The creature also accidentally frees Ford from his imprisonment inside the back of a truck, and pretty soon Ford comes face to face with both his father and mother's killer. This movie has a real sense of scale, and it's first noticeable in this scene when the Muto crawls out of its pit. I have never seen scale like this in a monster movie before. Not one Godzilla movie, even the ones that I praised, like Godzilla 2000, come close to this sense of scale, where you're looking up at the monster from such a low angle, and you're just seeing the destruction on such a human level because you're seeing it from the human's perspective. It is absolutely fantastic, and it cements Gareth Edwards in film history for all times. The military takes over operations from Monarch. Serizawa requests the help of Ford and Joe. Joe dies in transport, and the creature is named Muto. Serizawa fills Ford in on the history of Gojira. In 1954, a nuclear sub reached the lowest depths for the first time in history, and it awakened something. We get our first hints to the Hollow Earth here as we hear that there's giant creatures in this world that were like living in this era where the Earth was 10 times more radioactive, but as radiation subsided and went towards the core of the Earth, these monsters burrowed underground to, I guess, stay in touch with it so that they could feed off of it, which makes me question, does that mean Kong feeds off of radiation? Because there's that whole Hollow Earth is brought back up in Kong Skull Island, but does that mean like that the skull crawlers are radioactive and Kong is radioactive? It totally doesn't seem like it, but that's what this movie would imply. Ford lets them know that the Muto was talking to something, which is probably the only helpful thing he does for Monarch this whole movie. Ford learns that nature has an order, a power to restore balance, and Godzilla is that power. Kind of like the idea we had in Godzilla Tokyo SOS with Mothra. The Muto attacks a Russian nuclear sub, eating its nuclear reactor, and basically just drops the sub in the middle of Hawaii. This actually wakes up Godzilla, who shows up to save Ford, not intentionally, but he saves Ford in the process, and he fights the Muto. Godzilla's landing causes a massive tsunami and is one of the most epic moments in film history. This scene is fantastic as we are teased that there's going to be this big Godzilla reveal. The waves are coming in, these soldiers shoot these flares up, you see them drop down, and you just see the massive scale of his neck. You see him moving along, he's getting shot at, he walks away. You never actually get to fully see him, it's just glimpses of him. Once he shows up in the airport, he roars. It is incredible. The whole theater went freaking insane every single time I saw this movie. This scene is awesome. I love it so much. And then we abruptly cut away from the fight and we don't actually get to see it other than a little bit of teases on a news report of what happened. A second Muto hatches in Nevada and destroys Las Vegas. Ford hitches a ride with a military transport so that he can get back to his family, which I guess they just are like, yeah, we need all hands we can get, come with us. Serizawa suggests Godzilla is trying to help the humans, but the military plans to use a hydrogen bomb to kill all three monsters. Ford is put on a train transporting the nuclear weapons so that he can get to his family. There's a lot of real great nationwide damage as we see in the background of a lot of these shots, massive smoke plumes coming out from cities. And also we get to see a great scene of like a plane that went down on a highway and there's just so many cars destroyed. It just looks awesome. The female Muto attacks Ford's train, killing everyone but Ford, knocking Ford into the river where he's knocked out. This scene's pretty cool because, you know, you get a lot of these uncomfortable, very close-up shots with the female Muto, and it just overall has a really interesting and unique feel. San Francisco is under evacuation as Ford is recovered from the train's wreckage. Godzilla makes landfall, taking down a portion of the Golden Gate Bridge when an EMP hits San Francisco. Now, although I love this Golden Gate Bridge sequence, first of all, it's the only bit of Godzilla destroying stuff that we get in the entire movie, and I would have really appreciated a little more. Again, I really do like the way it plays out. However, I want Godzilla to destroy stuff. That's what I'm here to see. I'm not here to see Godzilla save the day, alright? I could go watch Godzilla vs. Gigan if I wanted that. I want to see Godzilla destroy stuff, and that's why I came to this movie, and that's why I was disappointed in the long run about this movie, is because that's what I thought this movie was promising us, was Godzilla destroying stuff. And also, the screen time for Godzilla does not bother me in the slightest when watching this movie. The other thing that's wrong with this Golden Gate Bridge scene is Godzilla would have to be like, 1,000 feet tall for it to be possible. He would not be able to stand up and walk through the Golden Gate Bridge. He's just not that tall, alright? He's not. He's a big monster, sure, but he's not like the 700 feet required to reach the top of the Golden Gate Bridge. When the EMP hits San Francisco, it's awesome because you know what that means. That means that the Muto has arrived. Planes start falling from the sky and the male Muto and the female Muto meet up. The male Muto snatches this warhead from a military boat, and then as he meets up with the female Muto, he gives it to her so that they can mate. I really like the scene of the Mutos meeting up because you have the male Muto fly onto this building and land on it, and he's looking around. He's pretty small. He's only like 150 feet. And then all of a sudden you just see these buildings just crumbling in the distance and the smoke just rising up, and out of the ashes comes the female Muto, and then they get to meet up, and she's 300 feet, so she's twice as big as him. And then they mate, and we don't actually see it on screen, luckily, but they do mate, and they have a hive of babies. A halo jump is conducted in one of the most fantastic scenes of Godzilla film history. And again, this movie, if you couldn't tell, has a lot of my favorite moments from Godzilla film history. The halo jump, Godzilla's first appearance in Hawaii, Joe Brody's monologue. There's so much to love about this movie. Although, this isn't my favorite Godzilla movie of all times for a lot of the reasons that I've listed throughout this review so far, and a little more that I'll get into right now, but generally this movie's pretty fantastic. We get one of the coolest lines in Godzilla history with Serizawa saying, "Let them fight." There's just a lot to love. So then we get Godzilla and Muto beating each other up. We don't actually see too much of it yet, but the battle begins, the halo jump is conducted, and Godzilla has a very quiet fight with the Muto. They don't want to wake anyone up. So there's a lot of sound effects missing in this final battle that really detract from the movie. First of all, when Ford's dropping from the halo jump, I can believe it that the adrenaline is pumping, but what I don't believe is that he doesn't hear Godzilla roaring 5 feet in front of him. I get that it's supposed to be artistic, and sure, it adds to that artsy level of the movie, or the scene anyways, but no way in the world is Godzilla going to be roaring and Ford not going to hear it. We we read like posters or whatever leading up to the movie, the advertisement campaign saying like Godzilla's roar can be deafening when you're too close. Well, if it's deafening when you're too close, how can Ford not hear when he's 3 feet away? That doesn't make any sense. But I don't know. There's missing footstep sound effects. Godzilla will be moving and it'll be silent. The Mutos will be moving and they're not making any noise. It's just kind of clunky, you know. I would have liked more sound effects. And a lot of the time, there's just like footsteps or whatever, and there's no destruction. And it's like, come on, give me some sound layering here. I know a lot of people are gonna be like, oh, but you like the Shin Godzilla sound effects, you hypocrite. We're gonna get into that next week, and I'll discuss why I like those sound effects and why in this movie I'm bothered by the lack of sound effects. If you remember back to Godzilla vs. Mothra, the 90s version, you will remember that I tore into that movie and was like, there's missing roars, there's missing footsteps, this movie sucks. I don't know, I actually don't hate that movie, but you get the point, where I was like, there's a lot missing here. There's a lot of sound design that's just done. It's just bad. That's how I feel about this final fight. One thing that I find very interesting is the male Muto's protectiveness. Now, throughout the movie, it's never like played up that he's just trying to protect the female Muto at all costs, but that's exactly what he's doing, alright? There's scenes in this movie when he will literally get so paranoid that there's gonna be like another Godzilla coming, that he'll fly off and take perimeter around the area just so that he can still have the upper hand on Godzilla. There's a 2v1 fight at one point when he's giving it his all, flying up and just smashing into Godzilla trying to take him out. And then, he sacrifices himself while trying to keep the female Muto alive. So there's a lot to like about the character of the kaiju in this movie that's not played up upon too much. The female Muto doesn't really seem to know what's going on. She just kind of gets the short end of the stick. If you really think about it, she doesn't do anything wrong. She shows up, walks around. That's literally all she does, is walk around, finds her mate, tries to mate, and then her babies are killed right in front of her, and she's killed as a result. Godzilla's kind of the bad guy if you think about it from that perspective of these two animals trying to have babies, and then all of a sudden this bigger animal just comes and picks on them and decapitates one of them and smashes another one into a building. It brings me back to a very interesting theory I heard by, I believe it was a YouTuber named Gorizard, and I know there is a YouTuber named Gorizard. Shout out to Gorizard, but I can't remember if Gorizard was the one who talked about this theory or not. Anyways, around 2014, there was a theory that I heard on YouTube from, I believe, once again, Gorizard, who stated that he didn't think that Godzilla was the power to restore balance in nature. He believed that the Mutos were. Humankind, mankind, has polluted and destroyed the earth so much that the Mutos show up to restore balance and kill off the humans, basically, and Godzilla shows up and is like, hey, wait a minute, I don't like this idea, and he kills them, basically out of revenge because they killed one of his species. As the body we found at the beginning of the movie, the skeleton, was a Godzilla species, or at least something very closely related to it. Which is a great way of viewing it, because once I heard that, it really opens up my perspective to the movie and makes me appreciate it even more. You do get the idea that Serizawa is very biased towards Godzilla throughout the movie. He doesn't want Godzilla to get hurt because his dad liked Godzilla, and you know that based off the terrible, don't read it, terrible Godzilla Awakening comic. Anyways, Godzilla intercepts the female Muto. The nuke is busted out of the hive so that the military can deactivate it. However, they're unable to, so they decide to take it offshore. There's, like I said, a 2-versus-1 fight where Godzilla is annihilated. Ford destroys the Muto's hive, distracting both Mutos. This is where you see one of the first times where the male Muto is just like, uh-oh, and he flies around doing his little perimeter watch to make sure everything's okay. Meanwhile, Godzilla gets the upper hand using his atomic breath for the very first time in order to save Ford. This scene will be remembered by me for all times because we were in the theater, me and my dad, and my brother was there too. And I turned to my dad, and the first time I saw it, and I was like whispering to him, one complaint, I whispered, one complaint about this movie, there's no atomic breath. Literally, not even 5 minutes later, probably not even 2 minutes later, Godzilla uses the atomic breath in this scene, and the second the blue lights up on screen and everything goes silent and you just hear it building up his spines, I was so excited, my heart was pumping so fast, I was probably the most excited I've ever been in my entire life, and it was awesome. Godzilla fights the male Muto for a little bit as the female Muto goes and attacks the soldiers who are trying to get the nuke out to sea. Godzilla kills the male Muto by lining up his shot. This is my stepdad's favorite scene in the movie. I don't know why. I think the female Muto's death is way better. But he lines up the shot. He looks over his shoulder. He sees when the male Muto's coming. And then he times it so that he can smack his tail straight into the male Muto's face, smash it onto a building, and impale him. And that works. The male Muto dies, but the building that he dies on is weakened and collapses onto Godzilla. Godzilla's knocked out for a little bit. The female Muto finishes attacking the soldiers and killing them off. Ford shows up and is able to sneak out to sea on a boat, but the female Muto catches up to the tugboat and is about to kill him when he has the nuke on board. Suddenly, Godzilla shows up from behind her, does the best Godzilla kill in all of history, which is his kiss of death, which was awesome. So he breathes his atomic breath down the female Muto's neck. It decapitates her by disintegrating the skin in her neck. And if you can't tell what that Muto is behind me, it's the decapitated female Muto. I didn't really know how to draw it. When I drew it without the head, it looked silly. So I just drew the head in there being blown off next to it. And there's the atomic breath smoke pouring out of her, falling over her head with the blood spurting everywhere. Because, again, this movie's actually pretty bloody. I've said this in previous videos, but this movie does have a lot of bloodshed in it that's just not focused on. It's a very dark movie, which is one of my biggest complaints. You really have to watch the Blu-ray even to know what's going on, and you have to have your TV's contrast pretty high because this movie's so dark. The theater wasn't like that, but the Blu-ray and the DVD are. There was second wave DVD Blu-rays that fixed this problem, but why do I have to go back and pay for another version of this movie when the first time that I bought it, the first 2 times that I bought it should have sufficed? That's just kind of unexcusable that they would do that when they did the DVD release of this movie. Anyways, the movie is very dark, so you don't get to see it too much, but there is quite a bit of bloodshed in this final battle. Godzilla bleeds multiple times. Anytime he's hit in the gills, he'll bleed, which is his biggest weakness in the movie, and the male Muto hones in on that pretty quickly. The city is saved. The next morning, Godzilla wakes up from the rubble. Elle and Sam and Ford are all reunited. It's a great happy ending. Godzilla returns to sea, and the movie ends. So, the human storyline of this movie is great. There's very interesting characters. I really do miss the inclusion of Cranston after the first act. Ford isn't too interesting, but I still like Serizawa quite a bit. The kaiju stuff in this movie is good. There's not enough of a presence for the kaiju. I mean, the whole movie's basically about the Mutos, but you don't really get a feel for Godzilla's presence in this movie, which is a big problem for it because this movie's called Godzilla, and although I don't have a problem with the screen time for Godzilla, I have a problem with his lack of effect on the story. He basically is just a big gun to show up and save the day instead of being the main prevalent thing in this movie like he should have been. Special effects are fantastic. There's amazing scale in this movie. There's very interesting directing, and the music's good. It's not Ifukube, but it's alright. It's serviceable. I like some of the themes quite a bit. I really enjoy I think it's called like Following Godzilla or something like that. That theme. I like the intro theme. I like the 2v1 songs pretty good, and Godzilla's Victory starts out pretty good. But a lot of the music in this movie is just kind of forgettable in my opinion. I don't think it's great. It's very distinct, I will give it that. I just don't think it's as good as Ifukube. Godzilla's design in this movie, it's okay. And I know I don't talk about Godzilla's design a lot, but seeing as though it's the design we're stuck with for now, or at least we think we're stuck with, it's okay. It could have been better. Godzilla is fat. Watch the movie. He's fat, alright? I don't care how much muscle is put on him. He physically looks fat, alright? Even if it is all muscle, he still looks fat. His dorsal fins are too small, his eyes are too small, and I don't like the elephant feet. However, again, that's not gonna I mean I've said this in videos before, that's not gonna take away from my enjoyment of the movie too much. It's just going to be a little thing. It's just going to be a little thing that I ding it on because it's alright. The characterization of Godzilla also needs to be worked on because he doesn't get too much of a characterization outside of he just doesn't like the Mutos. Overall, I'd give this movie a 9 out of 10. It's awesome. I love watching this movie. I have taken a break from watching it because when it came out in 2014, I watched it so much over and over and over and over and over again that I just had to cool down. I haven't watched this movie in probably around a year, so it's good to go back to it and check it out again. It's a great movie. That does it for my review of Godzilla 2014, guys. Thank you all for watching. I hope you enjoyed. See you guys next week for Shin Godzilla, a movie that somehow I managed to like more than this movie despite me loving this movie. Thank you guys all for watching. D-Man out.